Okay, so we'll begin with our second part of family planning and birth control. I have actually some source sheets there. It starts in the middle of the source sheet because last week we did a bunch of it. So I think we're up to now source number 19. And generally, last week we spoke about some of the fundamentals of the mitzvah of Pru Revu. How do we define it, and who's obligated, etc. Today, we're going to focus much more on this particular shiloh of both spacing out children and the question of using birth control prior to being yod to the mitzvah of Pru Revu. So the Shulchan Aruch in Even HaEzer, Siman Hey, Sif Yud Beis, writes as follows: Hamashka koshal ikrin la'adam, o l'shar b'alei chayim k'dei l'sarso, harei aser ve'ein loken alav. You're not allowed to give someone a koshal ikrin. What is a koshal ikrin? It seems to be there was some potion, some medicinal 19, source number 19, that some sort of drink that one could drink in ancient times that would stop a person from being able to have children. It seems to be pretty good. I don't know. We don't have such a thing today.
It's for a man or woman. So
the first case was a man, and then the next case is going to be a woman. But it seems that it would work both ways, which is fascinating. I don't know if really the medical knowledge of the particular example here, but as you can imagine, it's comparable to modern day birth control. V'isha mutaras lishos ikrin kidei l'sarsa. A woman is allowed to take this koshal ikrin, which causes her not to be able to have children. That's what the Shulchan Aruch writes. The Pischei Tshuva, which is a collection of different tshuvos, different achronim, so he comments on this as follows. He says that there are those, the Be'er Hativ quotes from those that say that this can be done even below tsar leida, even if there's not a significant amount of pain that the woman is experiencing. However, the Marshal disagrees and says, there has to be, there's always tsar leida, so I'm not sure exactly. I imagine he means that there's either maybe higher risk or there's some higher level of pain when it comes to the birth. And he has a very interesting kol shekain. Kol shekain im ein baneh holchem derech yishara v'yira shelo tarbe zera kihai. And certainly, if the children are going off the derech, then she's worried to have more children, so therefore that would be considered permissible. Very interesting. But others disagree. The Chasam Sofer, for example, he says, like we said earlier from the Be'er Hativ, he says even if she's doesn't have these other concerns, she's allowed to drink the koshal ikrin. She's allowed to drink this potion that would render her unable to have children. And the Chasam Sofer says, Umasik ladina, I bolded it there, de isha shelo yalda adayin v'lo kaima shaves lo tishta koshal ikrin. Assuming that she already had children, I assume that he's saying that we assume that the Shulchan Aruch's case was that she already had children. But if she never had any children, then she can't take the koshal ikrin. Avol im kvar kaima sheves. But if she did fulfill sheves, we mentioned last time, which was according to the Nitzib, even only one child. Sheves kol dehu, even just one child. Sharia afilu below tsar klal, even without any, let's call mitigating factor. Wow. Okay. But then the Pischei Tshuva comments, l'chora hainu bepnuya. It seems to be that this case is a woman who is single, or v'inami afilu b'nesua, or she was married, but kidabitu de Rabbi Chia, like the wife of Rabbi Chia. What is the case of the wife of Rabbi Chia? So I brought the Gemara for you on the source sheet. Source number 21. It's a Gemara in Yuvamis. It's a wild Gemara. Pretty wild Gemara, but let's look at its inside before we continue in the Pischei Tshuva. So, Yehudis was the wife of Rabbi Chia, and Havelit Tsar Leida, she had a lot of pain giving birth. Seems to be this was unusual levels of pain. So she was like, I had enough of this. But obviously her husband wants more children. And so I guess they didn't have the best communication. I don't know exactly what happened here. But she decided I need to figure this out without my husband preventing me from taking this medication. So what did she do? Shanai Mona. She changed her clothing. She dressed up so that her husband would not recognize her. And she came before Rabbi Chia as just a regular random woman, not his own wife. Amara, she said to him, Itasa mefakta apiri v'rivya. Is a woman commanded in Puravu? This is what we talked about last time. Is a woman commanded in Puravu? Amrle, what did he say to her? Lo, she's not commanded. So what did she then go ahead and do? She took that to mean that now I could take this pill or this drink that in those days made her unable to have children because I'm not commanded. Presumably, once you take this koshel ikra and you drink this drink, it's unrepairable. You can never have children again. So she drank the drink. Oh no, l'sof iglai milsa. At the end, obviously, I guess someone figured this out. He figured out that she took this drink, and he realized that it was his own wife asking him the shaila. Amar la iku yaladita li. How could you do this to me? He says, if only you had given me one child or had birth to one more child. Chada karsa achrisa. Maybe one more, the way some explain it, so another set of twins. How could you do this? I wanted to have at least one more set of twins, something like that. So the Chasim Sofer says, seemingly, she's allowed to do this because women are not commanded in Puravu. Okay, I'm not talking about whether this was the right thing to do. Seems to be it was painful to her husband. But the Chatzim Sofer says this would be allowed. Why would this be allowed? Because he writes back in the Piskei Tshuva he writes, because presumably the comment that he's making is presumably since she was married to him, but he could go ahead and marry another woman, or he could divorce her, then that would be allowed. How does he know this? So this is where he gets this from, this Gemara. He says, Ubi mayem shehem yachol habal lisa isha al ishto. In those days, when a man is able to marry another woman, even when he's multiple wives, o legarsha bal karcha, or he could have divorced her against her will. Im kain, imhu. Let's say he really wanted more children, and he wanted to fulfill the mitzvah. As we mentioned, there's 3 different types of mitzvahs. There's Puravu, Shavis, and La'arav Tanech Chadecha. He really wanted to have more children. He could go ahead and do it. He could marry another woman, or he could divorce her. That's why she'd be allowed to do it. In other words, it was maybe not the best thing, and probably was not so sensitive of her. I don't know the whole story there. We don't know. All we know is that the fact is she did it. How is she allowed to do it? Because if the husband wants to be Mekayim the mitzvah Puravu, he has other options. However, the Chasim Sofer, there's maybe the Piskei Tshuva. I don't know if it's still the Chasim Sofer. It may still be the Chasim Sofer. Sort of the Piskei Tshuva summarizing the Chasim Sofer, I think. He says, Ha'abal ha'inna. But nowadays, for a woman to do that, again, that would maybe, we're not going to get into the topic of sirus, of, what do we call it? They call it, what? No, sirus today, like if they have these euphemisms, tying the tubes. It's not really just tying the tubes, it's cutting the tubes. But there are ways of preventing women from being able to birth any children any longer. We're not going to get into that topic. It's a serious topic and serious shiloh about sirus, about it's not really the word castration is the wrong word, but basically making yourself impotent. So nowadays we don't have this type of drink, But I guess the equivalent thing would be a woman dresses up, her husband's a rabbi, and dresses up and she says, am I allowed to get this procedure? And he says, you're not obligated in Puravu. Again, sort of putting on aside the whole serious question, because maybe the rabbi would say you're not allowed to do that because of serious. But let's say he says, yeah, you could do that, or you could take this drink, which we don't have today anymore. That would be you would not be allowed to do that nowadays. Why? Because De'ika Chiram Rabbeinu Gershom Tzricha Rishus Mibaila. Since nowadays there is such a thing as Takana Rabbeinu Gershom or Chiram Rabbeinu Gershom, which means you're not allowed to marry more than one wife. If your wife decides to no longer be able to have any children, then you're stopping your husband. She's de facto preventing her husband from having any more children because he has no other option. He can't divorce her against her will, and he can't marry another woman. So her saying, well, I'm not required in the mitzvah of Puravu, so I could take this. That would have been good in ancient times, before, not even ancient, before Chiram Rabbeinu Gershom, but nowadays it's not allowed because she's not allowing him to fulfill his obligation of Puravu. So either she'd have to ask him permission, or they'd have to get divorced if she really doesn't want to have children, and he does. Amnam imhu eino rotze l'garsha. Let's say he says, I don't want to get divorced. V'gam lo nitin lo rishus, and he doesn't allow her. Nira li de'eno mechuyeves l'tzar atzma b'pnei shibuda shemishubedes l'bal. He says they are, again, remember this case. They already did fulfill sheves. He wants to have more children, but it seems to be they had one child. What are they going to do? Nowadays, she doesn't want to have any more children. He says, I don't care, I want more children. She says, well, okay, but let's get divorced. I don't want to get divorced. So what? They're stuck. So what does he say? He says, she wins. She wins. They had one, we'll have to explain this a little bit more, but they had one child. He says she's not required, because of her marriage, to put herself in this acute form of pain more than, let's call it's abnormal levels of pain. The rabbi or whoever, the one guiding them, he assessed the situation that it's an abnormal amount of pain. She doesn't have an obligation to go ahead and have another child. So even though they didn't fulfill the whole mitzvah puravu, one girl and one boy, according to Beis Hillel, they only did one. So the Beit Chasam Sofer says she's not required to have another child, and even though the husband wants more, and that's the only way nowadays to be able to do it, so therefore if they're stuck. What's the psak? The Chasam Sofer says that she's not required to have more than one child. Now, asks Rav Willig, he said, I don't understand. They weren't yoked to the mitzvah of Puravu. How could she say, one child is... This is another proof, again, if you remember what we said last time, it's another proof to his principle from the Netziv, that Sheves Koldu, even one child, according to Rabbi Nassim, as we mentioned last time, Rabbi Nassim holds that one child is a fulfillment of Puravu at a minimum Me'ikar Adin. And that's how Rav Willig understands this Chasam Sofer. Now, Rav Willig said this is not just true for abnormal levels of pain. There could be other situations where a woman says, I don't want to have any more children. What are other situations like that? So again, every situation is case by case. But I'll read a tshuva from Rav Moshe, and then I'll tell you what Rav Willig holds as well. So Rav Moshe applies this principle to areas that are not just tsar leda, not just situations where a woman says it's abnormal levels of pain, I can't do it again, it's too much. As we mentioned, the Chasam Sofer says if they had one child, she's not obligated to have more children. Because of the way Rav Willig explained it, because they're Yotzei the mitzvah through the mitzvah of Sheves. So Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. Even Ezra Chilek Gimel Simin Chof Daled. He says, let's say, again, the question is, can she take birth control? Or how long can she take birth control? Or how long could the spacing be? So he deals with a bunch of different examples. Vada mitzad he'iser zera levatala leka. He says, taking birth control, we're not really even getting into all the different forms of birth control. It's, just very, very simply, condoms are much more problematic than other forms, but assuming we're just taking birth control through a pill, the modern form of birth control, assuming that she's just taking a pill. We're not doing any physical blocking and stuff like that. So he says, certainly it's not a problem of zera levatala, assuming that they're having regular intercourse. V'im kash ha'ibor lifnei isha mitzad choli. Let's say she says, I'm very weak, I'm sick, I can't do it, it's going to be too difficult, or maybe she's getting medical advice. It's going to place me in danger. If I have children, I have to wait, I have to have practice birth control. Af imrak mitzad chulsha ba'alma kshu yoser mibisnam nashim. If she just says, I'm weaker than most other women, yish lahatu mitzad zeh, af below kayam adayim puravu. Rabbi Moshe says, if she just feels she can't do it, you're able to practice birth control, even if they did not fulfill puravu. Now, how long? How much time? How long can they space the children? He says, Eze zman katser ad sheteschazek gufa. A certain short, limited amount of time until she gets stronger, and then they can be Mekayim Puravu. V'koshkein shekiyim Puravu. Certainly, if they were already Mekayim, 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, then you could be Matir. How long? Moshe writes, Ad shalosh shanim. 3 years. 3 years to be on birth control. Imhi isha chola af shalo tistakein mizeh ela b'tchila b'yoser. He says, let's say she's sick, but it's not dangerous, but she's sick. He says, Mistaber de Mekayim Puravu Tucha Levatel. They could go, if they were Mekayim Puravu, then Tucha Levatel Be'ofen Zeh Af Legamre. The woman says, I'm done. I am done. I can't have any more. And even if it's not dangerously sick, but if it would put her in some level of sickness or pain or whatever, if they were Mekayim Puravu, Rav Moshe says, you could finish, you could be done. No more children. To b'shvil mitzvah sheves, eina isha meshubedes lebayla lehischalos mizeh yoser miderech stam nashim. A woman, because of her obligation to her husband, is not required to make herself sick more than the average woman. For the mitzvah of sheves, they already were mekayim puravu, but the husband says, "I want more." She says, "I can't." If she's in the way Rabbi Moshe says, if she were experiencing normal, even not dangerous levels of sickness, but abnormal levels of danger or just pain, she's not obligated. And I think Rav Willig would say this is true in other cases as well. Let's say he gave an example of a special needs child. Let's say a person they have a family, their hands are full. And Rav Willig gave the example, a person has a special needs child. It's not a sickness that the woman, I'm sick or I'm weak or it's dangerous, but her hands are very full having a special needs child. It's a full-time job. There's a lot going on. So Rav Willig he says that he expands this Rav Moshe beyond just the cases that he gives examples. But those are abnormal situations. But let's just say, to summarize Rav Moshe, he has 3 basic principles here. Number 1, he said if the woman is weak, they can wait a small time, if they had 1 child, to space out the children. He doesn't give an exact amount of time for that one, but it seems to be under 3 years, because the next level, he says, if it's not, if they fulfilled Puravu, they can wait up to 3 years until she gets better. And then he says, the third category was, they were Mekayim Puravu, and she says, I'm done, I can't do it, it's too hard for me. Then Rav Moshe says, they could be Mekel. And then Rav Willig applied that to a 4th situation, where I guess you could call it that they were Yotze the mitzvah. Rav Willig says, even when it's only 1 child, again, he says it's legitimate to say Puravu was fulfilled partially through the mitzvah of Sheves after 1 child. He says even if they have no sickness, but if there's a really abnormal situation, having a special needs child, or there's mental illness or whatever it is, after 1 child, Rav Willig is very, very lenient. But as I mentioned, all these cases are a case by case situation. But these are some of the general principles.
Lesher, so far we have considering that the woman says she doesn't want, what happens the other way around? The husband says she doesn't want, but the wife wants.
And were they Mekayim Pruruvu or not?
Yeah.
They were Mekayim Pruruvu. And the husband says, I don't, and what does the wife say?
She wants.
She wants to. So that is a bin Adam Lechavero question. Right? They were Mekayim the mitzvah of Pruruvu. They have a boy and a girl. The husband says, I don't want, can't afford it. I can't do it, and the wife says, I want.
Right, yeah.
Right? The husband says, I don't want.
Yeah.
Often the husband says, I can't deal with it. I can't afford it. Yeah, so that is something that we do. I get there a little bit. But it really is a shalom bias question. They have to work out, right? It's a question of there is a mitzvah, but it's not the chiyuv was already fulfilled.
What about?
We'll get to that a little bit. Yeah.
What about freezing her eggs?
You can freeze her also. What eggs? Freeze her.
I think you can freeze.
A whole different question, but I'm saying that's going in the different direction of other manipulating the body in other ways. But what's the problem with freezing eggs? What would be the issue?
Well, the issue could be you could unfreeze them and you can have pruvu
Okay.
at any time.
Okay.
So the thing
Why is that a problem?
Saying you can push it off.
You push it out.
But
You want to say you don't want to have children now, but you'll have them in 10 years.
yeah, but maybe her body won't be able to have.
Well, is she carrying the child in 10 years from now? I don't know. One of the main factors, not the only factor, one of the main factors when it comes to healthy birthing is maternal age. Maternal age is a big factor. So I don't know if anyone would suggest, if they have an ability to health in a healthy manner, everyone's on board and everyone wants to have children, they would probably suggest carrying the child as soon as one can. Pushing it off is done for certain reasons. If women never hasn't found a husband, or they want to have a surrogate, or whatever, there's a whole different parsha, which we're not really getting into. We're just getting into regular family planning, spacing. Husband says, yes, I don't want. He says, no, I don't want. The wife says, I do want. That's the basic that we're dealing with today. But that is a great, maybe third part of this year. IVF, other alternative measures.
It had something on MSN
Yeah.
that they froze the eggs,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden I think the eggs are fertilized anyway, and they freeze.
Yeah.
So then they said, well, this kid is now 14 years old. He's just being born. He's 14 years old.
I don't understand the case. The eggs were used
The
or not
eggs were
used
held for 14 years. Then they decided
to have the child
to have the child, and then they said, well, the kid's already 14 years old.
as a baby,
As a joke.
as a joke. Got it. Okay. All right. I don't see a problem with it on the face of it. What about just general spacing? Moshe doesn't give such a. He doesn't give a time at all. But it seems like he's pretty machmir on the spacing. He says, well, a small amount of time for her to get healthy. What is that? How much time? So the Nishmas Avram in source number 23, in the name of the Chazon Ish, he says that they can use any form of mutter birth control. K'dei laharchek es hachnasa laharayon l'shisha chadashim ad shana afilu shein al isha shum sovichim v'refuah miuchadim. She has no medical conditions, no concerns. She could go and space 6 months to 1 year without any shiloh. Why? Ki techifos halyaldos gam nechsheves kesafek sakana. Wow. Because this situation of having children too fast, not spaced, could be kesafek sakana. It could be possibly dangerous. I think, there's different opinions in the medical field, but I think most doctors will tell you it's recommended to space at least a year. Many doctors will tell you that. Rav Willig says up to 2 years is not a problem at all. Where did he get that from? His basic argument is in It used to be that women would nurse for 2 years. And I've seen this quoted in the name of Rav Henkin, even up to 4 or 5 years. Again, after one child, because in those days, if you were completely nursing without any formula, it would generally act as a contraception. It's not always the case, but generally speaking, women, at least in the Talmudic times, were not having children while they were nursing. And usually, I can't say this for sure, but it seems to be that when people are nursing without using any supplements, generally speaking, they're not going to conceive. So because of that, Rav Willa gives a blanket heter. I think this is how I'm understanding it. A blanket heter for up to 2 years. He says for sure recommended 1 year spacing, but 2 years is not a problem. Again, assuming that they had one child already. Why do I keep saying that? Why do I keep saying you have to have one, you have to already have one? There's people will say, there's other opinions out there that say, no, you could get married, you could have birth control, and they give you certain timelines, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. I don't, again, why? I'm a Talmud of Rav Willig, so I'm presenting to you Rav Willig's approach, and Rav Willig doesn't agree. Does not agree. Why? Again, assuming everything's, I'm not trying to presume that every situation is the same. There are exceptional cases, but assuming that it's a regular, normal situation, Rav Willig is against people advocating for being on birth control from the beginning of marriage before having a child. Why is he against it? So, first of all, there is halachic reasons he's against it. The Rambam says in Hilchos Ishus, Perek Tes Vav, Halacha Zayin, source number 24. The Rambam says a person's not allowed to marry lo yisa adam akara, should not marry a woman who's barren, uzakena, who's elderly, va'ilinis, or uketana, she'ena ru'ya leilit, she can't have children, elam kain kayim mitzvahs puruvivya. If he was already yotze the mitzvah puruvu, you can marry any of these women. So Rav Willig has a kasha. He has a kasha. Why can't you marry a katana, assuming I'm just putting aside the whole social problem and the whole maturity issue, but just halachically, what's the problem with marrying a katana? He says, be patient. Be patient. In a few years, she'll be able to have children. The Magi Mishnah points this out. Even though right now she's not a bas banim, she will be a bas banim. So the question Rav Willig asks is, why can't he get married to a katana and wait? So, Rav Willig says, presumably, if you weren't Mekayim the mitzvah of Puruvu, you're not allowed to knowingly marry someone who can't have children right now. So Rav Willig says, what do I call a woman? This is just classic Rav Willig's humor. What do I call a woman who gets married and starts practicing birth control before having one child? I call her a katana. She's a katana. Who cares if she's a katana who's 10 years old? Or she's 21, but she's taking birth control. You're not allowed to get married to a katana. So, what will people say? I have to have parnasa. I'm in graduate school. I have to get a job, whatever. The normal thing is to first have a job, then to get your things put in ducks in a row, and then to have a child. So he says, what do people say? There's a Gemara. People will quote. There's a Gemara in Sota, Mem Dalet. The Gemara in Sota says the Psukim in Parshas Shoftim, it has a process of derech eretz. First it says Asher Bana, you build a house. Then it says Asher Nota, then you plant a vineyard. And then it says Asher Eras, Limda Torah derech eretz. The Torah tells us first, Yavne Adam Bayis, first you build a house, V'yita Kerem, then you make a vineyard, V'achagal Yisa Isha, then you get married. You have to have a job, you have to have a house. So, is that really what people do? People they buy a house, then they plant a vineyard, they have their career, and then only later they get married? Nobody does that. Not today. People don't have really a full plan when they get married. Maybe they should have more of a plan, but you don't have, most people that I know don't buy a 6-bedroom house before they're married. Just people don't do that. So what's the Gemara saying? So the Torah Tamima has an answer in source number 32, and there's a Marsha. The Torah Tumima says it can't be possible that this means you can't get married before you have parnasa, because then it would basically be saying that anyone who's an ani, anyone who's poor, can't get married at all. And they're not yotze the mitzvah, puravu. So that's obviously not what the Gemara means. So the Gemara means maybe to say that if a person has parnasa, a person has a job, has this process, so this is a bracha, and this is this could be outlining the process for a person. It can't mean that a person cannot get married unless they have a whole career. It's just not possible. So that doesn't seem to be a legitimate reason to push off. What is another thing people quote? People quote from the Gemara from the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Parak Hey, Mishnah Chaf Aleph. It says, Ben Chamesh Esrei Talmud, Ben Shmona Esrei Chuppah. Why in those days did they get married at 18? They could have children before that. So by the way, the Rambam understands it to mean the 18th year. The Rambam in Ishas Tesvav Beis, he says, Mi ben Sheva Esrei, 17, the 18th year. So why did they get married at that age? People will say, well, they have to get themselves settled. They had to get more mature. And nowadays, so it's allowed to, person doesn't have an obligation to get married so young. So that's a legitimate reason. There's a legitimate argument to be made that, it's not just you have to have your whole career, and all your savings and bought a house already and you're 39 and then you get married. That's not necessarily a legitimate thing, but it's a legitimate thing to say a person doesn't reach a level of maturity. So whatever, age 23, 24, everyone's different. Maybe sometimes people can get married a little bit younger, but that is a legitimate reason. There's another reason that the Rambam quotes in that same halacha, in source number 27, he says, if a person, imhaya osek ba Torah, v'tared ba, if a person's learning Torah, and they are very occupied with it, v'haya misyare melisa isha, and they're worried if they get married, kedei shelo yitrach b'mizonos bavor ishto, then he's going to be forced to go out to work to support his wife. V'yibatul minat Torah, he's not going to be able to learn Torah. Harei zeh muter le'esacher, he can push off getting married. Wow. How long can you push that off? And people, maybe they'll say, well, if you could push off for learning Torah, so maybe you could also push off for graduate school. Is that a legitimate argument? So again, my Rabbeim, Rav Willig, this is how I got to this. Rav Willig was giving his reasons why he's against pushing off from the beginning of marriage. So I kind of skipped ahead. So number one, just to go back to that original point, number one, he said, you're making yourself into a katana, which is the Rambam says is not appropriate. Number two, he says, again, without having a child, he says number two, it's a somewhat of a form of gaiva. The couple decides, we're not ready. Okay, we're not ready. And then when we are ready, we'll have children. Who says? You don't know necessarily you're going to be able to have children. So there's a 15, this is what he says, I don't know if this comes from medical data, but I assume he's reading some medical journals, 15% infertility rate, 15%. And the number one factor, not only factor, but a very, very important factor, is maternal age of being able to have children. So Rav Willig says it's not so simple to decide, okay, we'll push off having kids for 5 years and then boom, we'll be able to have children. Who says you're going to be able to have children in 5 years? So it's a little bit of gaiva. And that's the second reason. And in general, my Rabbeim are very lenient when it comes to spacing after having one child. So one child, Rav Willig is very a big advocate for not practicing birth control before one child, but after one child, Rav Willig is very, very lenient in terms of pushing off and postponing and having and practicing birth control and spacing children. So I was in the middle of this Rambam. So could you say that if I'm allowed to push off for learning Torah, so I'm allowed to push off for graduate school? So I guess this could be understood as a third reason that Rav Willig holds. Rav Willig says that, and this is what emerges from the poskim here as well, that this idea of pushing off to learn Torah or potentially getting oneself on their feet or have some level of maturity, or maybe, as Rambam says, osik b'mitzvah, pater min mitzvah, you're involved in learning Torah so you could push it off. That's potentially all true when you're not married yet. But once you are getting married, then and you're going out, so then you should be ready to have a plan. Don't say, well, we're going to get married, but we don't have a way to have parnasa for 8 years. That's not a legitimate heter. In other words, the person says, I want to push off getting married because I need to get a okay, that's a different story. But saying that they're going to begin marriage with birth control, because the fact is they don't have a plan of parnasa, he says that's not legitimate. Again, every case, as I mentioned, is a case by case, and there are exceptional situations. I'm not going to pretend that there aren't. Rav Shechter on Shabbos a few weeks ago when he came, he discussed the concern of finances, and he talked about of using birth control from the beginning of marriage. So I'll just quote a little bit from Rav Shechter because I had a particular conversation with him because he's often quoted. Maybe say misquoted. He's often misquoted as saying the following. People often quote Rav Shechter as saying that Pru Ravu, and I have this on your source sheet, but I'm just summarizing it for you. Pru Ravu is not just having children, but it's also teaching them the Mesorah, passing on the tradition to the next generation. I think I even quoted it last time. He has it in this Torah web article, Parshas Matos. He says, before Matan Torah, the mitzvah of Pru Ravu applied to all people. And the essence of the mitzvah is populating and controlling the world. After Matan Torah, the entire nature of the mitzvah changed. It no longer applies to non-Jews, and Jews are commanded as part of the mitzvah to transmit the Torah to the next generation. If a Jew will have non-Jewish children, or according to many poskim, even non-observant children, he will not fulfill this mitzvah. Furthermore, if one is not able to have children but teaches Torah to the children of others, or supports Jewish education, it is considered as if he has given birth to these children, at least partially fulfill the mitzvah Pru Ravu. To fulfill the mitzvah Pru Ravu is not sufficient to merely give birth to children, rather we must transmit Torah values to them as well. So some people quote Rav Shechter as saying, well, if Pru Ravu is not just having children, but it's raising them with Torah values and giving them the next, passing on Mesorah to the next generation, so then you have to, you're doing your studies, you're doing your job, you need a parnasa, so therefore you're allowed to practice birth control because it's not considered completely pushing off the mitzvah because it's all part of the process of fulfilling the mitzvah. Similar to maybe what you could say in the Rambam says you're allowed to push off for Talmud Torah. How can you push off for Talmud Torah? Oh, because Talmud Torah, in order to learn enough Torah to pass on the Torah to the next generation, it's all part of preparing for the mitzvah of Pru Ravu. So some want to say that. So I asked Rav Shechter this question because I read his article in the RJJ Journal in 1982. I didn't read it in 1982. I wasn't born in 1982. But I read the article that he wrote in 1982, and he doesn't mention this heter of having birth control prior to even having one child at all. He doesn't mention this heter of graduate school, Mesorah, you have to prepare, and it's all part of mitzvah Pru Ravu to pass on the generation. He doesn't mention this heter. So I asked him about this. So he said that it's not ideal. It's not ideal to again, assuming everything's normal, everyone's okay, and there is a plan in place to support the couple, it's not okay to practice birth control without being yotze, without even having any children from the get-go. And he said similar to what Rav Willick said about the gaiva. He told me stories about couples who they decided not to have children after graduate school, and they weren't able to have children. He was actually crying when he was talking to me about it. He was very emotional. I believe Rav Shechter himself waited many years to have children. I think they were not able to have children for maybe 9 years or something like that. And now, Baruch Hashem, I think he has 9 or 10 children. So I think he's a Greek grandfather. But he was talking to me about it. So he said, why do people have this perception? Because a couple gets married. They don't ask a shaila until they're already engaged, and they find out there's some question involved with being on birth control, and they ask the rabbi. And the rabbi, let's say Rav Shechter told me specifically Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the name, but it could be anyone. They asked Rav Shlomo Zalman, we are now engaged and we want to know, he's in graduate school, she's in graduate school. And he said, no, you shouldn't be doing it. But the reality is they're not going to be able to push off getting married for 4 years. What are they going to do? And once they get married, they don't have a plan. So Rav Shechter said that b'diavad in this situation, where they have to be realistic and they have to get through their basic schooling. So he said it was a b'diavad situation, but Rav Shlomo Zalman found out more about the details of the case. I think he even said they were related to him, or maybe he knew the grandfather. I don't remember the whole thing, but basically, that situation is, the reality is it's a better choice. Rav Shechter said it's a better choice for the couple to get married and not make mistakes, and during, let's say, a long protracted engagement would be very difficult for the couple to be able to keep the halachos of not touching, of all those things. So that's a better option to practice birth control than to have a prolonged engagement. So that's why he said people have this perception that maybe it's allowed, maybe it's okay, because in the terms of those two options, it's a better option than protracting the engagement. But better to have a plan before going out that you don't have to then practice birth control prior to having even one child. I never got to your question, Gabi, but I will tell you that if there were already yod to the mitzvah puravu, Rav Willig said, you don't even have to call me. He says, I'll save you the time. Don't even call me. She's always right. That's what he said to me. She's right if she wants more children and you don't want. She's right if she doesn't want any more and you want. That's his opinion. Obviously, there are others, factors, and every case is a case by case. But in general, I think, if I'm understanding my Rabbi correctly, he feels that she's the one who takes most, I don't want to say the brunt of it, but she's the one the choice often affects her a large amount. And therefore, again, if they were yot to the mitzvah puravu, then generally speaking, he says to follow her cues.
And again, according to Rabbi willing to fulfill the mitzvah as what?
So he in a pinch, and he seemed he didn't want to be mikol, but in situations that are very unique, he was lenient even after only one. He gave examples. Let's say there's a special needs child. Let's say there's some mental health issue. Whatever it is, he was lenient even if it was only one child. And she says, "I don't want any more."
Otherwise,
generally, he says you should be yod to the mitzvah puravu, which is a boy and a girl. Now, he also said, which is a related question, which is, let's say again, it's a question of the husband wants more or the wife wants more, and the couple is not on the same page with this. So he said, in general, his advice to people is that there are presumed expectations going into marriage that are either explicit or implicit. Not everyone always says what they are thinking their expectations will be when they get married, how many children they're going to have. So he says in that situation, it's appropriate that the couple follows the social norms of their circles. So he said, for example, let's say a woman says, assuming we're going with Rav Willig Shita, a couple gets married in Satmar. And the wife, they have one child, and then the wife says, I'm done. One child, I'm done. I can't have any more. He says, it's not right. It's not right. In Satmar, we go for double digits. That's how this is his, like he was using his language. It's not right. He never said I want to have so many. She never said only on a. Okay, so you never talked about it, but there's a certain expectation in that community that you have more than one. Flip it around the other way. He says, let's say a YU boy gets married to a Stern girl, and they're blessed with one, they're blessed with two, they're blessed with 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, and she says, I'm done. And the husband says, what are you talking about? I want to have 15 kids, right? So Rav Willig said that's not right either. In other words, their circle, it's not a. They're not Hasidic. We're not Hasidic, and therefore, okay. So that's a little bit of a gray area. Yeshivish, modern. Is it 3? Is it 7? Again, I don't. He's just giving broad strokes, and the way he would counsel couples is like this is the social norm within your circle, even if you didn't say it outright. But this is sort of the expectation.
So that's even if they only had boys or only had girls.
They were already yot to the mitzvah puravu. You're saying, let's say they have 7 girls, but no boy. Right. Sometimes it's out of your hands. So that's a good, interesting shaila. So, and in that case, you want to say one of the members of the couple wants to try to be yotze the mitzvah, and one does not want.
No, but do they need to? Meaning because
Oh, do they have
meaning
a
because
right?
Rabbi Willie
Right.
told them
I
to
didn't
have
ask
one
that
of them.
question. Right. Interesting.
So yes.
I don't know. Maybe you'd say no.
Well, I would say like this: he's going to go back. Rav Willa is going to go back to the. I can't speak for him, but I can't speak for him. But I would assume that he would go back to the shalom bayis. He would go back to what does your wife want? What do you want? Because according to Rav Willa, you're yotze even with one. Me'ikar
I
adin.
thought you said you're only yotze with one in a special situation.
Right, but I think that would be somewhat of a special scenario where you had 7 children.
Right.
You tried. I'm saying, I think Rav Willa would go back to a ben adam lechavero here. Do you both want? Okay, if you both want, then it's not a question. I imagine it would be a question if one of the members of the couple want and the other does not.
But it seems like Rabbi Willick's saying if you had 2 kids and 1 boy, 1 girl, and then he's like, don't call me because it's...
She's always
wife
right.
says she's right.
So if she wants...
Let's say you had 4 boys or something.
Right.
And it's like,
Right. Interesting. That's a good question. Okay, all these questions are important, complicated, and hopefully, if everyone's healthy and everything goes well, they're also very happy questions. So, even though, as we know, it's not simple raising children, or as a grandparent, it's sometimes difficult, and there's a lot of challenges. But overall, I guess it's a bracha to have children. It's a bracha, and that's really what I think. Who was talking about it? I think it was Rabbi Karapkin, that the birth rate in the rest of the world is going way down, and it's a big problem. But in the frum world, in Israel specifically, the birth rate is going up because we have this value of perpetuating our values, and it's a beautiful thing. And the family unit is such an important piece of what it means to be a Torah Jew. It's not just the books and the Torah in a vacuum, but it's really raising a family. Raising a healthy family makes a huge difference. It makes that's how you change the world. You raise children, you do the best you can to raise children, and they raise their children, and they impact the world. So it's a beautiful bracha, and I give everyone a bracha that I guess everyone should be healthy. All the children should be able to be raised in the derech of Torah to the best of our ability. And these are questions, shilas that have to be asked, and they have to be handled with sensitivity, knowing the different players, and understanding that every decision is not made in a vacuum. Just like what it says. It says in Shulchan Aruch. Like, you have to understand the big picture, both the social context, the medical part, and the halacha. So it's a complicated area, but I figured we just discussed some of the applications. We didn't cover every particular scenario. But that was just to give you a general survey of the topic. Okay.